everyone, my name is Lee Scott and welcome to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. I'm so excited to have a very special guest today. She is a project manager at McWilliams Media. She is a creative and one of my best friend's girlfriend. Please welcome Camille Suter.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so great that you came on and you said yes to this. Okay, so let's talk about you. So are you originally from Tulsa? Okay.
So I grew up in Tulsa.
Okay.
My family is from Russellville, Arkansas, which is a small town. So it's kind of where the
think
roots are.
What's funny, I think I've actually driven through Russellville going to Mississippi.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Northwest Arkansas.
So is it in the Ozark area?
It's close to it, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you grew up here in Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how was your childhood like? You know, how has that informed you and influenced you at this point in your career and
Sure.
what you do?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a creative, and at McWilliams Media, I do web design and graphic design and that kind of stuff. I have always been creative. Like, my parents used to tell me that I was always drawing and putting on little shows for them and like that kind of thing when I was little. My dad is a big advocate for creativity. So that's something that I've been around a lot of my life, just hearing kind of his take on all of that. But I wouldn't say that I really got into art until high school, and it was actually because of some just interesting events that happened in my life that led to that. So I was actually really athletic and like into volleyball, and ended up having to quit that because I got diagnosed with a nervous system disorder. Wow. Just kind of like some freak accident kind of things happened and left me with chronic pain that I actually still have to this day. But through that process of learning about my diagnosis and having to seek treatment and go through all of that, I stopped playing sports. It was actually something I wanted to pursue in college. So it kind of like, it completely changed my trajectory. Yeah. And I started doing art more just as an outlet to express myself. But I ended up realizing that I really loved it, and so that informed what I studied in college and now what I'm doing now, which is really awesome because I love it.
That's cool. You know, I think we are all affected by events in our lives, you know, and that's so interesting. That experience pushed you into something that you love to do, and it might have been fundamentally you thought, oh, well, I want to play sports, but that may not have been your passion. That's so interesting to me that something that is really, for some people might be heartbreaking and challenging, became the foundation of something that really has made you a significant and impactful person in your space and in your world. So like, how has you getting into the creative space now, knowing your diagnosis and knowing the things you've experienced with
It's called Amplified Pain Syndrome.
Amplified Pain Syndrome.
Or AMPS, or Amplified Musculoskeletal Pain Syndrome.
Okay. So with AMPS, how has that played into how you create things? Because I can only imagine if you're creating a pot or if you're painting, you have limitations. So how do you deal with that, those limitations, and still work really hard to express yourself?
That's a really good question. I mean, just to be completely honest, some days are really hard. Similar to like some autoimmune diseases, like I'll have flare-ups. So some days it's a lot more difficult to function than others. And that definitely does influence my creativity. Like, just, you know, whenever you have pain, it's really loud. So sometimes it's hard to like think straight whenever it gets really bad. So I would say those things, and like that definitely does determine like how much I can do on a certain day. But just like overall, my pain experience, I think, has like, in like an emotional sense, has informed my art. Like that was more of, you know, like functioning day to day, but I actually did a project last year when I was a senior in college. We have senior show for art majors, and so I created a show that was all about, like the theme was that we don't get to choose what we're given in life, but we do get to choose how we respond to it. and what
good.
our attitude is.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, completely came out of, having experienced the chronic health issues that I have, because it's just a daily choice of choosing to have hope and have joy despite it, especially whenever it gets really bad. And then with that senior show, I also did something like in conjunction with it where I raised money actually
awesome.
for Amplified Pain Research.
Okay.
There's a hospital in Pennsylvania that like first kind of discovered like what effective treatment looks like for it. And so they have a foundation, a nonprofit that does research, because it's just still like a very not
discovered.
Well-known disorder, but I mean so many people have it. So so that was really, really awesome to be able to give back in that way to people that created a treatment program that has helped me.
Camille, that's really amazing and awesome that you took the opportunity, in spite of what you're experiencing physically, to say, you know what, I'm going to use this as a platform through my creativity to help other people. Like, that's such a powerful thing, and I think that's such a significant thing. And, we'll talk about that some more later, ways where people can get involved in helping people. Because I think, I don't have this platform just to not talk about issues that affect people's lives.
Yeah.
But being more intentional about addressing things like that and addressing arms and how can people help work through these issues. I don't know why this came to my mind, but because of some of the limitations, are you finding yourself creating manageable ways to be creative? Because I think sometimes people think that you have to do a lot at one time.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
But how are you managing your energies to be more effective with your creativity?
That's a great question. So with my work, I use a lot of my creative brain power, so to say. And so right now I feel like a lot of that creative energy goes to work. And sometimes like I just have to be honest with myself and know that like I'm just not going to be as productive as I would be if I'm having like a flare-up day. Luckily, I have very understanding employers that allow me to have that space to do what I can do. And if I need to take half a day off or something like that, like it's manageable. But I don't know if you know anything about the Enneagram, I'm a 4-wing 3, and 3's, that side of me.
I'm a 2-wing 3.
Yes,
so
loves to
achiever.
be super productive.
Oh yeah.
So it's definitely been something I've had to work through because I always just like had this idea, like especially when I was first diagnosed with AMPS, was like I just felt so worthless, like when I couldn't contribute or I couldn't produce, because there was like so much at first that I couldn't do, and I was trying to figure out how to deal with it. So that's something I still fight with, but I think that like definitely, when a lot of my creative energy is going into work, like I'll try to do kind of other things, like other creative outlets. Like I love cooking, for example. So like that's like another creative outlet that helps me to kind of like.
So I'm coming over. I have had some of your food, by the way. Now that I think, but I have. She's a great cook, by the way.
Yeah, but kind of like split it up into like different types of creative energy, so to say. It kind of helps me to not like exhaust everything like on one project. Or
in other words, you're using wisdom and how to use your creativity.
Yes.
It's interesting because it makes me think about how, and it seems like a running theme every time I have a conversation with somebody or interview someone, is that we give so much of ourselves to our work, and then we have to figure out, how do I invest in the stuff that I love? And it's hard to do that. It's very hard to be fully engaged, but I think that's really awesome and a really great strategy to say, okay, this is what I'm going to give my energy to, and let me figure out how to do something else. Then I'm working a different part of my brain. It actually made me think about.
It is kind of like using different parts of your brain.
Yes, it made me think about. I think I might have been having a conversation with somebody, or I was listening to a podcast or something like that, and someone was talking about how if you are someone who works with your hands, the way that you can recharge and not just sit and do nothing, do something like brain teasers.
Yes.
Because you're working a different part of your body and your functionality.
That's why I think I love like cooking, and then like I love pottery too, which is very, very hands-on. So it's like another type of like brain power that you're using.
Yeah. And I think it's helping you use every aspect of yourself. You know, it's interesting because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about, people that only think that they should work one side of themselves. How can that better them? How can people exercise other aspects of their creativity?
Yeah.
Like if let's say for instance I'm a doctor. I'm not an actual doctor, but I'm going to have my doctor one day.
Yeah.
But if they're doing surgery on people every day, what is a way that they can deal with the other aspects of themselves to find creativity and breathability?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on every person, but I firmly believe that everyone is creative in their own way. So, I mean, even like in a surgery, I can't imagine like how much creativity and like problem solving and like quick problem solving has to take place with that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like that exhausts that part of you for the day, kind of. I don't know. I would say to just like find something that you really enjoy. I think that like whenever we rest, like it's important to not just, and sometimes it's totally okay to just veg out in front of the TV, but like it's also really important to do things that you love and enjoy and like spend time with people that you love, because I think that's a really effective way to rest as well, and just use a different part of yourself.
That's really good.
So it depends, but I think everybody kind of knows what that is for them.
So let's talk about this subject of creativity. Do you think that it's like a gene, or do you think everyone has a level of creativity?
That's a great question. I really believe that everyone is creative in their own way, and something that I get a lot as an artist, particularly, and a designer, is everybody's like, oh, you're the creative type. And a lot of people like me have expressed that they've gotten a similar thing kind of throughout their lives. But I think that mindset can be very limiting, that like only artistic people are creative. I think that, we were created by a creator God, and because we're made in his image, we all have innate creativity. I think it definitely looks different for every person. But yes, I think that we're all innately creative.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that understanding that there is a way that we can express ourselves through our abilities and our talent is obviously a creative situation. And that's interesting, because you bring up a valid point when it comes down to this idea that like all of us can express and show our uniqueness through what we do. So just kind of staying in that lane, how has that proclivity towards seeing that people can do it, how do you get people into that space? Because I think a lot of people, when they think of creativity, like you said, they think it's only drawing and writing and stuff like that. How do you get people to think a little bit different when it comes out to creativity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that just knowing that you're creative and being able to look for ways that you specifically are creative as an individual is really important. For example, I have a friend that her creativity is just really always reflected in her baking. Like she just loves to bake.
That's interesting.
That's like her favorite kind of creative outlet. And I feel like it wasn't until, it's one of my roommates that somebody in the house pointed out to her, like, this is like your form of creativity. Like this is like the way that you express it. Before that, she didn't really see it that way. I think it's really important that just to point out like, oh, this is kind of your creative niche. Yeah.
That's really cool. I might need to have some of her cookies at some point because I'm looking forward to eating. I'm always a fan of baking, but just I think that's a great idea. I realize for me and what I do, there is kind of I tend to see the world through leadership, or just see the world through this kind of idea, and so therefore anytime I'm having a conversation about it or talking about different things, I'm kind of pushing in that way. It's interesting because our first meeting is a very unique situation. I met you at a meeting that I did last summer.
Yes,
and I was talking about, I kind of got into the space of talking about creativity, even though
so good. I was just head nodding the whole time. Yes.
That's great. But I was talking about this idea of creativity, and Camille, I realize that like all of us can benefit from understanding what you're talking about, like knowing the value of what we do and why we matter, and how do we express that in our baking or eating
or problem solving.
Yes. I think that's phenomenal and great idea. So, do you think that people can develop this and grow that muscle for creativity?
Definitely. I would encourage anyone that is wanting to grow their creative muscles to just create something, to just do it. I think that we can get so caught up sometimes on just perfectionism and wanting to make something perfect before anyone sees it. And a lot of times, people aren't holding you to the same standard that you hold yourself to. And people love seeing other people's creativity. I feel like I just see that on social media constantly. Like, we're living in a generation where, like, it's really cool to be creative. And I think that gets celebrated a lot via social media. And I mean, I would just encourage anybody that is wanting to grow that to, like, not only take the steps that they need to start pursuing their creative passions, but to let other people know that they're doing that, because that encouragement just goes so far, and encouraging you to keep going.
Yeah, that's really great. To your point about just media and how people are being more creative more than ever, it's so interesting because people are being are basically allowed to just be themselves like never before, which is very interesting to me because, like you said, art informs culture and culture informs art. So there's just like this give and take that is happening with creativity and media and different things like that.
Just sharing stories.
Yes.
Too.
Yes. That is a phenomenal way to think about creativity and how we all inherently have it. And let's just kind of stay in that vein. So when it comes down to people expressing themselves, I know you said just do it, but like, what are some practical things they could do? Should they ask friends about, what are some things they do really well? Like, what are some ways that they can
definitely
dive into that?
So something I'm really passionate about and why I really love art is because I think the ways that you learn to think whenever you're making art can really be reflected in any industry and in anything else that you're doing. There's studies that show that high school students that take art classes in high school generally have better grades. They generally have just fuller lives in general, and are willing that type of thinking, that taking risks and just like being creative and exploring when all bets are off will translate into their careers, and they're more willing to take risks and more willing to just be creative problem solvers in their field. So I would say that just get your hands messy. Just, if cooking is your thing,
that's
cook.
the word. Get your hands messy. That's the name of this episode. Get your hands messy. Great.
Yeah, but like cooking or painting or singing, playing an instrument, whatever it is specifically for you. But I would also say in whatever industry you're in, there's opportunities to be creative. If you're a teacher, I think there's so many ways every day that you have to be creative.
They have to be.
Yep.
you can't keep the attention of
you can't keep the attention of kids. Yeah.
Without creativity. That's a great response. I think that's a phenomenal idea. And it made me think about how, and you probably do have an opinion about this, but it's interesting how even if you look from a state or a governmental perspective, which, I always do, how we don't invest into the arts as much as we probably should or could. I'm not here to get your opinions about that, but it made me, when you were talking, it made me think about how the point you're making about people being well-rounded because of the fact that they went to school or they were went to an art school or were in an art program or got an opportunity. I know for me, I did play sports, but I didn't play all the way through high school. But I went to a performing arts school, and I realized that a lot of those experiences and that exposure in music from a cultural perspective taught me so much about the world. Like I start seeing
teamwork too.
Yes.
So I would argue as well.
Yeah, it seemed as if it really informed a lot of what I began to understand about people and how people engage and the uniqueness of people and their sound and all these different things that was happening in that creativity. So just going kind of back a little bit, you were getting that media and different things like that, and how art is being demonstrated in media. In your work, how do you do that? How do you really portray your creative gene in the work that you do, working for a media company? Because we're all influenced by media so significantly. So yes. How do you do that? How do you use your unique niche to show the world the beauty and majesty?
So how I kind of exercise my creativity in that context is I help people figure out, first of all, what is your brand and kind of what colors and what verbiage surrounding your company kind of makes sense, but also just how do we get people to know you through your website, through media, and that's the same thing on social media. That's not really something that I take care of personally, but at our company we have people that work with our clients to try to capture what their voice is. For social media, whenever we run their accounts, that kind of thing.
Which we might need to have a other side conversation about account running.
Yeah,
this is real. But that's interesting, and I think that's really amazing. It seems to me, even in what you're saying, Camille, that like people like to connect to stories. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Definitely.
How has you being creative and just being the person that you are, when you're designing somebody's or helping them articulate something in a brand, okay, how are you figuring out how to express their story using your skill set? How are you figuring out how to do that process when you're helping people with that?
Well, as a designer, I would say probably the top three things are images, color, and fonts. Those are probably the top three kind of elements of a brand. Like what kind of imagery you're using, and that can either be photos of them and them like doing their work, or just stock photos that like reflect kind of an aspect of their industry or something. And then colors that they either prefer or like, or that we feel kind of fits their particular business. And then fonts too. Fonts have so many different personalities. It's so interesting.
Yes, that's so true. As a designer of my emblem, that fonts and colors and just designing things has a way of expressing certain things. I've never ever actually thought about it that way, that it's connected to the basic premise of like social media posts. Like, that's interesting to me. So like, okay, so let me just give you an example. So if you were doing a design for maybe a wedding, or let's just say wedding specifically, like what are some of the things that you think about as far as with your creativity of expressing what they need to see in that type of design.
Sure. So are you saying like a wedding planning company or for somebody's wedding?
Yeah, like if they had like a website and they wanted
Okay.
to, you know, there's their names on there.
Gotcha. Like the couple expressing their...
There's their names on there and expressing. Yes. Like, how do you think about that as being creative? Because I think sometimes people don't know how to articulate what they want until you show them what they want.
Definitely.
And they're like, oh, yes, exactly. So
yeah.
How would you do that?
Well, I think it probably really depends on the particular couple and kind of what
That's
their
true.
vibe is. If you want to just
Because every
say
couple
it
has a
like
vibe.
that.
Every couple has a vibe. Let's be real.
Yeah. But a lot of design elements are usually kind of informed by what the trends are too.
Yeah.
So I would say that if I was designing like a website for a couple, I would probably show them some examples of like what's trendy, but also really just pay attention to like what their particular preferences are. I would say like when choosing fonts, for example, like a serif font, which has the little, you know, decorations on it, usually looks a lot classier, or like a like script font, that's kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
or like a sans serif would be a lot more modern and clean looking. So that would probably be something I would start with, like, you know, compare these two things, which one's more you, like compare colors, which one's more you, and just kind of go from there and to figure out what the look and feel they want is.
Yeah, and even in saying that, you won't do the same thing when you're talking to a coffee company.
Yeah.
You know, as you were talking, it made me think about even the fact that creativity is very specific and it can be expressed different ways, and it looks different in every person. As I talked about in my episode, or talked about it in the seminar, but it looks different in everyone.
Yeah.
And how do we express that? So along that line, how do you? What are some things you think about when people are figuring out their lane in their creativity? Because I think that there is
like their creative niche. So
yeah,
to
like
say.
What are your thoughts about that? Because I feel like everyone has it, but how do we kind of get into that?
How do you get
space?
people to that point?
Yes.
This is really trendy right now, but I would honestly say take a personality test.
Yeah.
Because I think that within every industry, like there's, you know, going to be different personalities. Some personalities tend to gravitate more towards industries. Like if we're talking about the Enneagram, for example, I would assume probably a lot of type 1s would, you know, want to be surgeons because they're very perfectionistic and like that kind of thing. Like maybe more so than like a type 4 like myself that's very, you know, free floating and like it's hard for me to be like that. I don't know. I would say taking a personality test probably is like a really good starting point.
Yes.
Because it can tell you a lot of things about yourself that maybe you wouldn't have been able to articulate. I also think that personality tests, you really want to make sure that you don't like box yourself in.
That's true.
That's
very true. That's very true.
But it can be a really good way to kind of understand, oh, maybe this is a little bit more like the direction that that I'm going or naturally go. Myers-Briggs too is great for that as well. But just to, because even like with Myers-Briggs, it'll tell you like top career choices for, you know, this personality type or that kind of thing.
Right. I would agree. I think that's a great way for people to really dig into their creativity, because then you start to realize, oh, I can be this person. I can be unique in this space.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about this as you've been talking about as we've been talking about creativity. It seems as if it's not a hard thing to understand. You know, I think we have in culture and society have like you said, use that box. Even with the Enneagram, we use that box and say, well, I can only be this.
Yes.
I can only function in this way. I can only do this, but no one's life looks that way.
No.
I mean, even though you're a 4, you haven't lived in the same place as other 4s. You haven't, you know, had some of the same experiences as other 4s. You have a unique thing to your life because that's your life. So how you express certain things it's going to be very different because you're you. I think all of that is so good. Great pick. Such a good idea. So let's just kind of keep moving. So I'm kind of going to wrap it up a little bit here. There's one thing I ask people all the time when we talk about, I interview people. If there was a song you would use to describe yourself, what would that song be and why?
That's a fun question. I think I would say there's a song by Andy Grammer. It's called Good Parts, and it's all about, I'm a big lyric person, so I really love the lyrics.
Boyfriend is one too.
But I love that in that song it talks about how like the good parts of your life are the parts of your story that make you unique, even if they're hard parts of your story. Well, that's good. And we live in a culture that, you see everyone's highlight reels all the time.
Yes.
And so I love that it talks about how like being real is really what the good parts are of your life.
Okay, so Camille, thank you first of all for doing this. Thanks
for having me. It's been
so awesome to sit down and talk with you about the subject of creativity and your story. Like your story is so impactful. So, how can people connect with you, and what are like some of the things that you're working on currently?
Sure. So, I kind of like I mentioned earlier, I love pottery, and I just recently got a kiln from Facebook Marketplace, which. Like, if people don't know, like, they're super expensive. I got a steal of a deal from somebody. So now that I have that, I can actually fire pottery. And I'm planning on selling that later this year at some holiday markets during the holiday season.
Make your money.
Yep, I'm excited. I'm excited. And then I'm also starting a Etsy shop where I'm going to sell some digital prints and downloads and that kind of stuff. Cool. But then lastly, kind of like I mentioned with my chronic pain and like that part of my story, I am just feeling led to share more about that publicly. And I think it's something that I haven't shared in the past a lot, just for fear that like it was just going to look like I wanted attention or sympathy. And I know that that's not true. I feel like it's just been kind of like a roadblock in my head, so to say. But I'm excited to start sharing more about that just on social media and just as a way to like encourage and inspire other people who are dealing with the same things, or even different things, but just people that would understand.
And we need your voice.
Yeah.
And we need your voice in that regard. Camille, thank you so much for doing this. I have learned so much about your thing that you deal with. I don't want to say disease because, it's under the blood. But I have learned a lot about your diagnosis and a lot about you. And so it's been really great to have you on. I'm so grateful that you did this.
Yeah, me too.
Let's go. Thank you for watching or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. I hope that you were inspired, equipped, and empowered. If you haven't done it yet, subscribe today. And to get updates about all the things that I'm doing, connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Lee A. Scott II or Lee A. Scott II. I hope that you will tune in for the next episode of Leading with Lee. Much love, and let's get started.